Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast, brought to you by PenFed. I'm your host, Heather Lucky Penney. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. This week, we're discussing the role of advanced simulation in readiness. Our Air Force today is too old, too small, and we are struggling on the readiness front. And don't get us wrong, we've got the best airmen in the world who make miracles happen every day, and they perform above what we have any right to expect given the challenges they juggle. When our nation calls, they answer, and they do so magnificently. Operation Midnight Hammer is just one example, but you can only do more with less for so long. You've got to reset and rebuild. That's why you've heard Air Force leaders from the Secretary on down emphasizing rebuilding readiness. That means boosting spare parts inventories, flying more often, ensuring we have a seasoned bench of maintainers, and buying new aircraft. It also demands harnessing technology in new ways, and that includes simulation. Ironically, even if we could magically start flying every combat pilot 3 to 4 times a week, which is a way healthier sortie rate than we've got now, we'd still fail to achieve the kind of readiness and tactical proficiency we would need to prevail in a high-intensity peer conflict. Why? It comes down to the complexity of the modern battle space and constraints on our ability to simulate the scale and scope of that operating environment. Our ranges are too small to accommodate the speeds and distances we need to rehearse, and we don't have enough of the high-end aggressor aircraft or surface-to-air radars and emitters and threats to adequately simulate peer threats and the kind of scenarios we must prepare for. Moreover, our bases and ranges are not connected or located such that we can routinely integrate beyond the wing level. Think integration with space assets or employing electronic warfare. But even if we could, we'd still be constrained because we'd either conflict with civilian daily life or we'd give away valuable information to our adversaries. And we don't want to reveal our war reserve modes. So to dig into how we can help tackle key parts of this readiness challenge, we've got 2 experts from CAE, a major company in the simulation space. They've got a lot of Air Force simulators, and they're the prime on the Air Force's SCARS program, Simulation Common Architecture Requirements Standards. So we'll talk about that too. But first, let me welcome Nick Master Yates. Master's background is from the B-1. He's a patch, a WIC IP, a squadron commander, and he retired from the HAF Operational Training Infrastructure Chief in A3, which meant that he oversaw all the Air Force sims, ranges, airspace, emitters, etc. Nick, it's great to have you here, and thanks for making the time.
Yep, thanks, Heather. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. I think there's some significant challenges that we are facing in how the force trains. And at CAE, we're really trying to get after filling the gap that we know is necessary to prepare our warfighters to dominate in the next engagement. Thank you.
And with him is Matt Martin, who flew the RC-135 as well as MQ-1 and 9, and now he's currently the lead for the C2 ISR and RPA portfolio for CAE. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Lucky. I really appreciate to be here. And I have to agree with Master. You know, we're really pushing the boundaries in the integration of advanced modeling and simulation into the operational environment to kind of bring this next-gen LVC to the warfighter. So looking forward to talking about it.
No, thank you so much. You know, LVC is going to be absolutely crucial to creating the combat proficiencies that our airmen need. And frankly, I believe is a moral requirement. We need to ensure that we provide the organization, training, and equipping for our warfighters so they can go do what we ask, which is go into bad guy land, execute their mission successfully, and come home safely. So I did my best to lay out the readiness challenges that are facing the Air Force, and you're both quite familiar with these issues. Help our audience understand better the training constraints that are facing today's airmen, especially when it comes to flying at the rates and the intensities that they need to be decisively proficient and lethal.
Lucky, you talked to the flying and the rates, and you mentioned something with maintainers earlier. The first message is that we need to fly, and we need to fly more live.
Yeah.
That has to happen. We have to turn wrenches, we have to turn sorties, and we have to get the airmanship required. What is shifted, and that the force has to shift to, is on what we do when we fly live versus what we do when we go indoors. Airmen are getting the most out of their simulators currently based on the quality of simulator we are providing, the quality of environment. And so what we're talking about is instead of you get all high-end training at one stop in Red Flag, the one time a year that you go, we stop that. And that becomes you get your live fly requirements, your airmanship through exercises like that. However, the high-end fence in to fence out training for the next fight is going to happen in the synthetic environment. It's going to happen indoors. And so that's a complete shift of how we've trained up to this point. We trained that legacy mentality and it made us dominant in Desert Storm. And then we went into a 20-plus year
30-plus year,
right?
Right?
Counterinsurgency effort that is not that high-end fight. And so we just got to shift. We got to accept it and then aggressively go after it. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, and when you say that we're going to shift that high-end training capability to simulation of the synthetic environment, really I want to lead into LVC, live virtual constructive. And so we'll define that and we'll break that into the various elements for our listeners. But when we're flying, we want to have the ability to pipe some of that constructed threat scenario or the virtual where, you've got a simulator that's networked with a live flyer, an aircraft that's actually airborne. So bringing all of those elements together so you get the benefits of all at the same time.
100%. And I will default to Matt here in a second. He's deep into this world right now. But LVC, the term LVC, we always said in the Pentagon was a 4-letter word. And so everybody avoided it. But
it was a great idea, but for so long, technologically, it just wasn't feasible. We had latency. We didn't have the right data links. We couldn't actually create the right constructive or feedback loop for the live flyer, so there were safety of flight concerns. But I think now the technology is advanced where we're now on the cusp of being able to integrate that and do so, and we should, for daily flyers.
You just took my comment. That's spot on. We're there now. And we're able to do it at a cost point that's not prohibitive, which was the big problem back in 2018. We weren't there technologically, and we were not there at cost point. And now we have figured that out.
Yeah, I like to say we're putting the L back in LVC, right?
I like that.
For decades, really, we focused on platform training. The simulators were an extension of that, the venue where you built foundational skills, aviation skills to operate your weapon system. Some mission training capability, weapons employment, multi-ship tactics, right? But really focused on the tactical aspect. What we're doing now is introducing both for platform-based simulation, but in this LVC environment, more complex advanced modeling and simulation, where you can do things like use AI to create a really complex, tactically realistic red force that's dynamic that you can fight against, right? The data environment so that you can create all the ISR data, all the C2 data, stimulate operational systems, integrate those C2 and ISR components, and have that total joint force coordination and interaction in both the virtual and the live environment, right? And then putting that on a foundation of cybersecurity, cloud-based infrastructure. This is what the SCARS program is doing, so that not only do you have cybersecurity baked in, but you can start to integrate these simulation systems with operational networks, Link 16, command and control networks, joint fires network, that kind of thing. And now you can introduce that constructive data and that dynamic red force into the operational environment, actually transmit the red force data over Link 16 to live players and present them that complex training environment in the live flight cockpit integrated with the other virtual players, right? That's really where we're going, the work we're doing in U.S. Indo-PACOM and other places.
That's super exciting. And now when you say virtual players, you're actually talking about pilots or operators in simulators on the ground that are operating their system in that simulated environment, but they're playing with, if you will, with live flyers as well.
Yeah, in the past, that was really difficult to do because the airplanes weren't designed to do that. You had to hang special pods onto the aircraft, modify the operational flight program, software of the aircraft so that they could actually receive that data. But new capabilities, a lot of that is built into 4th and 5th gen platforms and will definitely be a function of 6th gen platforms where the jet can be turned into a simulation mode. and you can send that data directly to the airplane and have the right indications in the cockpit. So the key then becomes now integrating your virtual players who are in their high-fidelity mission training systems, and not just cockpits, but the C2 aspect, right? The intel folks, everybody that's part of a targeting cycle, as well as joint players, in their ships and ground vehicles, et cetera, and having a data infrastructure that allows them to do that, such that when you are flying a four-ship of F-35s with CCAs against a dynamic red force, a couple of those airplanes might be live jets, a couple of them might be virtual. Some of them will be constructive, created by the simulation, but the players won't even be able to know the difference. They will plan, brief, execute, debrief together. They will step to their jet or step to their sim, and they will go fight the war in a highly realistic manner.
Did you want to tag onto that at all? I just saw you write something down, so I wasn't sure if that was...
Yeah, so I will, and that what Matt was hitting on also is the all-domain piece. So we're able to inject cyber, space, surface, subsurface, naval capabilities and actual impacts into the scenario, even if they are not actually there.
Yeah, that's the constructed piece of it.
So the constructed piece, the key is that we go all domain here, because the night one, when everything shuts down because of all of the traffic that's happening, we've got to be used to that. We used to go all GPS out sorties. That was the big thing, right?
Yeah, That was your day without space. But
now think about it without comm. Think about it without certainly GPS.
Yeah, and that speaks to that need to get away from. In the past, we would white card those functions, right? We would say, pretend that your GPS doesn't work, right? Or pretend that your radio doesn't work because it's being jammed. With that data infrastructure in place, with the advanced modeling sim tools integrated onto the operational networks, we don't have to white card that anymore, right? We can actually introduce those effects. We can make the jet think that its GPS is actually being disrupted, denied, degraded, right? We can remove communication systems. We can model the complexity of C2 systems such that if there's red force activity against a specific C2 node, you actually see the effects of that in the training environment, right? And now those players have to actually fight against those really complex tactical dilemmas, as well as integrate into the operational layer so that they can judge themselves not just on their ability to employ the weapon effectively, but are they actually achieving the operational objectives of the O plan, right? Again, with both live and virtual players doing that.
Yeah, this gives us something different to be able to measure readiness by, because we're actually putting operators in their environment. We are testing them and stressing them at a level that we can't train to if it's just simply live fly, and honestly doesn't develop the proficiency, awareness, judgment, and airmanship that we need if all they do is fly the simulator. So this integration piece is really crucial. Matt, I'd like to dig a little bit more into, I think one of the questions that's in my mind is, okay, this is really strenuous. First of all, how do we build up to that so that when we do these kinds of injections into the live fly, that we can also assure safety of flight?
Sure. It's kind of a thorny problem, and in the past, when we conducted large force exercises and we had virtual or constructive elements in that exercise, it could be pretty limiting, right? Because you don't want to necessarily broadcast hostile tracks on Link 16 to a live audience, right? And we had to go through sort of a process whereby we say, okay, we're going to reserve all these track blocks for our constructive tracks, but we can't turn them hostile because that would set off alarms, or we're just not going to integrate virtual players into a portion of the live exercise because it was just too difficult. And so we weren't able to get at that level of integration. The key, and there's still a lot of challenges remaining in doing that. Like, how do you use INDOPACOM's operational Link 16 network to conduct exercises and introduce that type of constructive data, right? The approach is to do it at the data level, right? To use simulation tools that can create the right types of operational data such that the operational systems think they're receiving live data, right?
Yeah, because to be clear, you're not actually stimulating the radar or the radar warning receiver or the other apertures on the aircraft. They're not receiving any kind of emissions. What you're doing is sending data to their processors so that it's integrated on the multifunction displays, tactical awareness displays, whatever displays the operator is using
right.
so that they can then play as if they were real.
That's right. For example, out in PACOM, we're very focused on the missile defense problem, right? And the Missile Defense Agency is busy developing new capabilities to integrate all the different systems that would be involved in a joint air and missile defense problem, like defending Guam, as an example. So you'll have 4th and 5th gen fighters that are going after red air and cruise missiles. You'll have ground-based air defense systems that are going after short-range ballistic missiles. You'll have the Navy with their Aegis cruisers going after medium-range ballistic missiles, all trying to operate in the same airspace. So you have multiple joint controllers that are trying to tackle that problem. And in the past, there simply was not an opportunity for that joint team to plan, brief, execute, debrief against a common problem set in the same environment. So that's what we've built out at Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, where we have the Army systems like the Integrated Command Battle System that's operating the ground-based air defense systems. We have the Air Force's TOC-L, the Tactical Ops Center, providing the air control component. We have the Navy's virtual Aegis. By modeling those red air threats and the sensors that would be collecting against those threats, the radars, the ISR platforms, by creating then the data that would be coming from those sensors, we can stimulate those C2 systems directly without necessarily clogging up the live Link 16 picture, such that you have full fidelity on those C2 systems, and you can actually go through that joint problem together.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So following up with exactly what Matt was talking about, for the training specific, when you get down more to the tactical level, the key is that the threat presents itself behind the glass as it will real time. And that's where we've had a huge challenge, because you could throw a synthetic inject to live onto the link, but it doesn't present as your sensor may pick
as
it
it
up.
would. So it's not going to be fused or processed
Checks.
as the FCR typically would. So it will end up gumming up or glitching within the aircraft system.
Yep. As Matt alluded to, the data, not only the data correctly presenting in the cockpit, but then the data comes back for immediate debrief, and we're removing the 3-1 coin flip.
Yeah, because you've got the actual data. You
got the
actually
actual data.
know how that would play out, how that engagement would play out.
So that poor wug that may have hooked a ride because of a coin flip, maybe he didn't. He doesn't have the opportunity to do it again.
In fact, we can compare what we call sim truth to the Blue Force mental picture of that of an operation or a tactical engagement. Because we are creating synthetic sensor data that is going to those different players, and then they are processing that data, creating their own target picture, their own common operating picture. You end up with a sim truth picture and a Blue Force perception picture. And because you're capturing all that data, you can do analysis. You can actually flag, hey, you thought this was a friendly track, or you thought this was a hostile track, and it absolutely wasn't. And now we can step that back and figure out where that breakdown in that mental model occurred, and really get at the cause of targeting errors or other decision points that need to be improved or adjusted, right?
And when you talk about combat lethality and proficiency, that's really a key element of ensuring that we begin to understand where we make those perception errors so that we can then understand where we make those execution errors.
That's right.
And if it comes down to whether or not that's not processing the data correctly or it's a cognitive human misperception, this is really crucial. So that's a very, very interesting in terms of, especially when we begin to scale, because it's easy to do this at the 2-ship or the 4-ship level, but when you begin to scale to large force exercises, especially when you integrate across all the different components, whether or not that's Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Space, this could actually introduce more errors, especially if we don't have the same standards. And if you multiply perception errors, that can become even worse.
Manage your money on your time with 24/7 digital banking on the PenFed mobile app. Easily make payments, transfer funds, and deposit checks through mobile deposit.
That's music to my ears.
Learn more at penfed.org. Federally insured by NCOA.
I want to step back a little bit, though, and just rehack where we're at, what exactly is simulation, the state of simulation, so that folks can understand, first of all, how incredibly diverse the simulator ecosystem is. And when they walk into a sim, is it actually simulation, or is it really more of an emulator, right? Because most simulators that airmen experience are these emulators. The hardware, like the cockpit, the switches, the displays, they're not the actual parts we would touch on a jet. And the OFPs, the operational flight programs, or the software that the jet runs on, isn't really what's in the simulator, right? It's some company's best representation of how they think a jet and its sensors and its avionics behave. And also, the environment or the battle space that these emulators fly in is a representation of the real world. It's not actually physics-based. So can you break that down and help our audience understand that more?
Sure. We're in this kind of a transition period where we're going from this legacy approach to simulation, where when you have a new weapon system or as a weapon system evolves, you're designing a training system specifically for that weapon system. It becomes a handmade wooden shoe, right? And if it's an aviation platform, you build a cockpit, try to use the hardware, the actual hardware from the cockpit so that everything matches. You run the operational flight program, but then you build hooks into that OFP so that you can add.
Well, if you're lucky, you get the OFP,
That's right. If you're lucky. Yeah.
If you're not the OEM, if you're not the original equipment manufacturer,
Right.
the OEM might not provide the aircraft OFP to the vendor that's now building the simulator.
That's right. And it's always been a struggle for the Air Force and the other services because they had to create these large programs to try to get at that very high level of fidelity of their mission training systems, whereby they'd procure that data from the OEM. They'd hire a company, often the OEM itself, to produce the trainer because that just kind of streamlines things. And then have to have a separate program with a large engineering effort. Every time the jet changes, you got to go in and change the sim. You have to modify the program. You have to do an engineering change. It takes years sometimes to get new weapons models, new threat models into the simulator. And so that sim often lags behind the airplane. And you're just not having concurrent training, let alone then integrating that kind of unique training system with all the other ones. And of course, the Air Force has used the DMO, the Distributed Mission Ops Network, to try to do that. But that's what we call a federated system, where every training system is independently creating its own training event. And then you send these little data packets across the wire to try to correlate so that hopefully you're seeing about the same thing at about the same time and can have, at least for coordination aspects, training together. And that's really all the legacy approach, legacy capability. We've been trying to do that for 30, 40 years, and it's still really, really challenging, right? So the answer to that is to take advantage of all the latest commercial cloud capability that now exists and apply that to this problem of mission training, right? And that's what the SCARS program is doing, right? When we take a weapon system trainer like the F-16, completely virtualize it, and then host it in this cloud architecture, that now gives you the ability to rapidly push new updates to those specific software components, right? New weapons, new radios, whatever the case is. You can develop that using a DevSecOps approach so that you get the cyber accreditation once you've developed it. And then because you have this cloud architecture, you can push those updates directly to every training system. And that really makes it easier to achieve concurrency. It completely automates the cybersecurity process, right?
Huge.
Now we can, instead of having to get guys on an airplane with a hard drive to go update the latest copy of Windows 11 on a trainer, right? We can actually push that over the cloud to those training systems and keep those systems cyber secure, right? But once you have that infrastructure in place, now you can take this data approach, right? Because everything is virtualized. You have direct access to every piece of software in a training system, and it's much easier to then stimulate it with that highly realistic simulated data and create that complex training environment, as well as connect in other simulators, because now you're not just correlating simulation events. You're actually you have multiple players participating in the same simulation event, and that concurrency correlation is kind of baked in.
So when you say that you have multiple players participating in that same simulation event, is that environment in the cloud? How does that actually break down?
Yeah, it's in a hybrid cloud, and it's probably a good time to talk about the Joint Simulation Environment, JSE, because JSE is really trying to get at this problem. You need to have the absolute highest fidelity representation of those threats at the physics-based level, so that if you're in your F-35 and you're going up against a very sophisticated air defense system, you need to be able to use your stealth and defeat that threat in a highly realistic way so that when you meet that thing for the first time in real life, you'll be successful, right? That requires very low latency. That requires threat models that are based on classified data, the latest intelligence data that is concurrent. And every time your potential adversary changes their radar, we need the new threat model to train against. And it's really hard to do that with the legacy approach. It's really hard to do that with federated, distributed SIMs. So JSC has to be hosted locally, which leads us to kind of a hybrid cloud solution, right?
So why does it have to be hosted locally? Is it just because of the bandwidth? I mean, like the number of calculations the processor is doing? Because this is all physics-based, it's doing fluid dynamics in the background?
Something like that, right? And of course the latency, right? If there's even a couple, if there's even 20 or 30 milliseconds latency in the presentation of the threat, now you're really not realistically presenting how you would actually fight that threat, right? With the hybrid cloud approach that SCARS employs, you can do that simulation locally, right? You can have a local reference hardware stack that is with all the horsepower that it needs to really crank out the physics-based simulation of those threats, of the weapon system performance, of the weapons, the emitters, the sensors, et cetera. But then you have the cloud connectivity reaching back to a central security ops center, which is what SCARS uses, to provide a higher bandwidth, lower latency, long-haul connection than is currently available through the DMO network or the Navy's NCTE or those other kind of traditional training networks, right? Still have that coordination with other players integrated into operational networks, but retain the advantages of the local simulation that's much higher fidelity, right? So you can fight your red threat locally, but then you can coordinate with your C2 or the rest of your strike package over long haul and where the latency is not as critical and get kind of the best of both worlds.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I mean, because when you get back to the emulators, one of the big challenges of that, especially because these are constructed environments and the environments are often built by the same vendor who is building the representation of the aircraft OFP, that becomes very difficult. You can't really network those legacy systems independently, bringing them together because their environments are different, because their emulators, the representation of the aircraft, the weapons model, et cetera. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, as you mentioned, there's a lag of when you get a new update modernization package to the airframe, that there's that lag in the simulation. And then also why you get those simisms and glitches is because their representations is not the actual OFP. So this begins to erase that all. How do you deal with legacy systems? Do they have to then hand over their model?
Well,
does this make those vendors irrelevant and you have to rebuild or actually use the OFPs from the OEMs? How does this work out from a business perspective?
Master and I are smiling. I think you would have a hard time arguing with Boeing and Lockheed that they are irrelevant, right, in the training space. It really needs to be a sort of a government-led, government-owned approach, right? And that's what SCARS is, right? SCARS is a government-owned cloud, one of the few that's out there. And we started, so the S stands for standards in SCARS, the second S. And you really have to start with that standards-based approach, right? So the first couple of years of the SCARS program were spent on establishing what those standards were, not just interoperability, but cyber management, right? How do you reach into a virtualized set of software tools to remotely scan and push patches and updates and manage it as a cloud-based cyber approach? And then once those standards are established, that becomes the requirements. That's the R in SCARS, right? And so now it's kind of incumbent upon the U.S. government to have all of the manufacturers of different simulation systems comply with those standards. And on the SCARS program, every OEM is an affiliate. The government is paying them to migrate to the SCARS architecture and doing everything they can to get everybody compliant with those standards so that we can then ultimately have this hybrid cloud approach.
So when you say OEM, you're talking about the aircraft manufacturer that is providing the OFP.
The aircraft manufacturer and the makers of all the different simulators, right? So sometimes the OEM makes the sim, sometimes a third party like CAE makes the sim. So whoever is making that sim is an affiliate on the program.
Okay. So we would still have emulators that could dial into SCARS?
So SCARS itself is the hardware standard.
And software standard.
It'll host the software.
Oh, okay.
We have hardware on-premise equipment that is being installed at each individual simulator site. That stack, it's a tech stack is all it is. It's a rack of servers.
But it's a standard reference stack
It's a
of
standard
servers,
reference.
not custom made for each simulator.
Correct. Yeah. That then each individual OFP can be rehosted on that stack. And by the way, it is providing an umbrella of cybersecurity that each site is currently paying for, each MAGCOM is currently paying for, and we're making it one. So there is one umbrella of cybersecurity that is on this on-premise equipment tech stack that then you can hang your best-of-breed apps, be it a virtualized F-16, virtualized B2, whatever it may be, JSE in a box, and it all can be hosted on that same stack, and it's covered by that cyber secure umbrella that you no longer have to pay for individually. It's already funded by the Air Force, and it's going in to all the sites. So
there's a little carrot there whereby once you become compliant, once you've migrated your trainer to this reference hardware stack, you get the advantage of an enterprise ATO with new capabilities, right?
Checks.
So if you
When
are
you say ATO, you mean authority to operate.
That's right. The authority to
So it's a
operate your sim.
cyber term.
Yeah, at multiple levels of classification, connecting to both training and operational networks, right? Whereas before, if you wanted to introduce a new capability onto your simulator, you'd have to go through a whole process to gain the ATO and get the approvals for all the networks, and it sometimes takes years, right? If you want to get more work for your program, introduce more capabilities, you develop it per the DevSecOps standards of SCARs, you can deploy that stuff right away. When an OEM wants to field that new weapon, but the Air Force says, well, I can't take it yet because I haven't trained up all the crews to use it, right? Well, now we can actually help them with that by leading the fielding of the operational system with the training through this rapid deployment of the sim.
Would digital engineering and the advancements of digital threads and digital models and digital twins feed into this?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
That's what's feeding the joint simulation environment. And Matt mentioned earlier the ability to use AI to build a red air picture that are all digital model based, and therefore it's dynamic and it's actually thinking. And so it's not presenting the same, was it Mike 80 coming around the container that would always shoot you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was totally predictable.
Totally predictable. And so what we're trying to build out is, or what we are building out is digital models that present a different look for the warfighter each time.
That they're dynamic, they're responsive. How do you train then red air or red threats to behave in a red way, right? So there's a difference between just being dynamic and responsive and also being accurately representative of how we expect red to behave. How do you do that?
So I think we don't abandon our old ways. There was a reason we did it.
Yeah.
There's a reason we had aggressor squadrons that studied the tactics and learned. The key is to apply the AI technology and let them watch the aggressors, how those guys and girls are changing and adapting and doing their thing. And then the AI starts acting like them.
Yeah, we can really do two things in that regard, right? We can use new AI tools like large language models to ingest all that data, right? So there are 3-1 tactics volumes on red tactics, classified volumes, right, that have a lot of that data as a result of, years and years of observation and analysis, right? And we can ingest that data and instill our AI with those behaviors, right, taken directly from those classified sources. And then when you run simulations, right, you still are going to have a sort of an OPFOR, an aggressor commander, who will say, okay, for this particular exercise, for these objectives, here's what my red force is going to do. And now the AI can observe that behavior in the simulation and take advantage of machine learning to update those behavioral libraries as it starts to observe those things, right? Of course, you can also do that operationally, right? As we take in intelligence data where we're actually observing live red forces when they do their own training events and their own exercises, right? Then we can update the AI with those behaviors as well and start to get to a sort of digital twin of the red force to feed a mission rehearsal capability in addition to just a training capability.
I think that's really crucial because one thing I think folks don't really appreciate is the limits of our ability to replicate aggressor forces because we're often doing that in blue force equipment.
Yeah.
And so the limits, the capabilities, the technologies, the waveforms, the maneuverabilities and EM diagrams of actual red forces differs from our ability to simulate live.
Yeah.
And so having that within the threat environment as an AI replication can actually provide us more accurate red threats. And this is even more important given the fact that we're seeing aggressors being shut down. We're divesting those sources. We don't have enough live players to actually stress us when we do the live red flag. The one thing that would concern me, though, is ensuring that we are continuously, I think, quality checking the AI so that it doesn't invent something new that isn't representative or accurate regarding how we expect or know or have observed actual red air to fly.
Yeah, that kind of quality control.
Like the hallucination. I don't want a red
Yeah.
air hallucination.
Yeah,
Right?
that kind of quality control, that explainability in the AI is
Yeah.
absolutely key, right? And so as we develop the tools to ingest that data, we're also building sort of the SME oversight is still going to be crucial, right? And as we create these training events, you want to be able to visualize as the exercise planner or the designer of the training event or the instructor, be able to kind of visualize what the AI is going to do. And we can do that, right? We can actually project out based on a MESL, right, a master event scenario list, or the key things that happen to happen in an exercise or a training event to achieve the objectives of the training. We can kind of project out based on those events what the AI is going to do, display it graphically, and give you the opportunity to quickly say, oh, well, actually, that's not what it would do, or that's not what I want it to do, make adjustments. And of course, that is more data that goes back into training those models on how to behave properly.
And so then this could feed into our own blue air capabilities, especially lead turning capabilities that we may not yet have fielded. For example, collaborative combat aircraft.
Yeah, for sure. So a complete shift in how we design aircraft and then how we employ it. Obviously, the whole test process will continue, but perhaps we have a physics-based, high-fidelity environment that allows us to accurately replicate radar cross-section, electromagnetic spectrum, and all the things that apply to that. And, the whole saying of build the airplane in flight, maybe we're building the airplane in flight. Maybe we're building the airship, designing in the synthetic environment, and then transferring over to the physical ship itself. So you're developing tactics, you're developing capabilities and certain things on that airship, but you're doing it in the synthetic environment against all the models that we've talked about, the accurate, actual, no kidding, red models. And so now we're building something that has already been tested against what it's being built to beat. So that is another shift. Not only are we shifting how we train, what we do when we train in certain environments, perhaps we shift on how we develop these actual physical airships that go live, but we do the hard work in the synthetic environment.
Well, and we see the autonomy companies that are building the agents for the collaborative combat aircraft. We know that they're building that autonomy within the synthetic environment. But I think what's really unique is as they build the flight autonomy, and then as they build the mission autonomy, so that's how the agent manages any sensors or integrates inputs, whether or not that's a data link input or some sort of or some sort of sensor input, how it integrates and then controls the flight autonomy to maneuver, behave,
Correct.
and then express the decisions that the CCA agent or even the direction from a quarterback, so a human who is directing the CCA, not physically manipulating it or flying it, much like you do with a remotely piloted aircraft in MQ-9 or Q4 today, but directing it more like they would direct a wingman, a loyal wingman, right? So we know that they're doing that within the synthetic environment. I think what's unique and different is that what SCARS creates the opportunity for, what the JSE creates the opportunity for, is to test the tactics and ensure that we're developing the tactics, techniques, and procedures in such a way, Master, as you said, that we can test against red air, and red air that we know is representative, so we can actually find out, does this work the way we thought it would? So we can test our hypotheses and refine our TTPs, and that feeds back into the mission autonomy, the flight autonomy, and we can create a much faster feedback loop than we would be able to if we were just limiting ourselves to live fly.
Yeah. Even more fundamental than that, right? Because as you say, these things are really hard to replicate via live fly. The complexity, the red force.
let's see how long the siren goes for. Oh, hey, we're getting the garbage men too. It's just all fun.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, get back to
Yeah. So as you say, these things, particularly when you talk about developing CCAs, what the role is going to be, what the control mechanism, the ConOps is going to be, really hard to replicate via live fly at the speed and the scale that you need to get there quickly, right? We are just not at the point where we can go out and fly 20 CCAs with multiple quarterbacks doing complex mission sets, right? And so as you develop your complex simulation environment, that becomes a natural proving ground for those things, right? And not only can we test the tactics, but we can get at some of these fundamental problems, like how many CCAs can one person actually supervise and not become totally overwhelmed, especially when they're still trying to fly their own airplane.
Yeah, and what are the GUI? What's the graphic?
That's right.
What's
The human machine interface.
Exactly.
Yep.
How does the pilot actually do that? So
That's right.
are there things that we can do to speed their interaction, reduce friction,
Yep.
change the way that they do that kind of direction? We have to test all that in simulation first.
Absolutely. And in fact, that data infrastructure with that complex data modeling really enables that, right, with the high fidelity environment, because now you can incorporate the human element in the same data environment. So we have tools now. In fact, this is some work we're doing in PACOM where we can wire up people in sims or air battle managers as they're going through different tasks with devices to collect biometrics, take that data, and we've developed these things called cognitive classifiers where we can actually measure their level of situational awareness, their task saturation. We can actually measure.
I'm ski roping, man.
Yeah.
I would totally fail
Seriously.
that test.
We can actually measure someone's trust in an automated tool,
That's it.
right? Do
Oh,
they
that's
actually
huge.
trust the CCA to go off and do the task that they're assigning it, right? And then you can design an HMI that presents the right amount of information at the right moment that maybe even adjusts the level of autonomy of a CCA so that when you're getting task saturated because maybe you're trying to not get shot down, for example, right? The autonomy level of the CCA increases, it continues its mission, and then when the system detects that you're back on top of things, you're ready to focus back on the CCA mission, it reduces the level of autonomy and you have more direct supervision, right? And then start to develop like, okay, does the air battle manager transit the CCAs through the airspace and then hand them off to an F-35 pilot or a strike package lead? Are there fleet management functions that are built into the control system? You can actually do this type of development as you are working out the ConOps and the TTPs, and also giving these guys the opportunity to actually train with this capability, which they may not ever have the opportunity to do live, at least not for years.
Yeah. So as a pilot in the future, are they going to have like a boatload of wires and stickers and sensors like all over them to measure their cognitive like stress levels?
We've got some new tools that are very low profile, like a simple wrist-worn device that collects all the data that we need. So it's not too.
I was going to say like, I'm
cumbersome.
not sure I really want to go into that kind of world. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Where are those sensors going to be sticking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I need to bring us back because that was a little bit of a... Okay, so let's talk about if we're looking at the potential for this environment to be able to mature and develop and field CCA. How are you guys involved with this at all? How is this moving? How are you being integrated into the CCA programs in Tranche 1 and Tranche 2? What that ultimately becomes?
Yeah, so we are partnered with companies like General Atomics, Shield AI. We're also working with the Air Force Research Lab, as well as the new experimental operations unit at Nellis that Air Combat Command has stood up to start to bring some of this capability to those efforts, those OEM and those government efforts to test and develop, right? And we're actually planning a series of events here next year in Indo-PACOM where we will marry some live CCA flying with some of this simulation and human-machine teaming assessment and actually incorporate that into the operational environment. And I think that'll be the first time anybody's doing that.
Okay, that's super exciting. So we've talked a lot about the potential for what this integrated environment could be, networking together, having the hybrid component, so you have different systems able to play within the joint simulation environment. But I want to go back to, Master, you had mentioned JSC in a box, because right now I understand the joint simulation environment is available in one place, and that's PAX, right?
That's where it's full up and where training is actually occurring and has been for a couple of years. So JSC in a box is a software kit
Okay.
that then delivers the physics-based high-fidelity environment to include the different servers, so your weapons servers, your threat servers, your weather, all the things that is operating currently at Pax River in JSC. What SCARS is able to do is actually be what allows you to deploy JSE in a box. So the on-premise equipment that has that cyber secure umbrella that I spoke of, JSE in a box. Now, so the JSE, the technical baseline for JSE, now hangs on the SCARS server and is then deployed into that individual site.
Okay, so for example, every squadron should have a SCARS server that has JSE in a box sort of integrated into it.
Yeah, correct. And you know, what I typically say is that, so instead of having to schedule Pax River for the 1 week a year you're able to get if you're an F-35 squadron,
that's just not enough.
you now, on any given Tuesday, can go into your simulator and you're operating in a physics-based environment with what you have locally. We're not trying to recreate red flag at your local facility, but it's what you have locally and what you determine to be required to be there if you need to bring in a AWACS or potentially a wedge tail or something like that.
Then you could do that kind of distributed collaboration that Matt, you spoke about.
Correct.
But otherwise, you could build constructive environments. So you could still do an LFE in the simulator with constructed partners, correct?
100% correct.
Yep.
Could you LVC with your jets in the air?
You can.
Absolutely, and at the right level of classification.
Yes,
right?
sir.
So
That's key.
So part of SCARS is building in a true multi-level security capability, which is more of a policy challenge than a technical challenge, right? You still have rules that say systems need to be air gapped, et cetera, right? So that's gonna be one of the things that transforms training, right? So inside your F-35 squadron using JSE in a box, that you could potentially train at the top secret SCI level with the highest fidelity threat models, but then still be connected at the secret collateral or secret coalition level to be connected to those other players and still train in that collaborative environment.
That's huge, and being able to have that deployed to individual units is essential because we've gotten feedback from some units where they fly in their simulators and they crush them every time, like the blue force crushes red. They go to the JSE and it's a totally different experience. And it really comes down to the physics base, the fidelity of the models, flying with the actual OFPs. It makes a huge difference. So we have to be conscientious that we don't get the negative training and become overconfident and learn the wrong lessons through our simulation. We need to make sure that we learn the right lessons.
Yeah, and an example of exactly what you just described is when a 5th gen or stealth aircraft opens its doors, it's an emotional moment for those folks that are doing that. They just became exposed. In an effects-based environment, it typically does not actually show what is really going on. And so you don't get punished for that.
Yeah.
In a physics-based environment, it's real and you get punished for it. And so you learn different transition ranges, you learn different tactics of how and when to do things like that. That is negative training if you're not seeing the reality of it, and that's a problem.
One of the things we're very proud of is you mentioned Operation Midnight Hammer at the opening, right?
Yeah.
Of course, we have built the B2 mission training system since the beginning of the B2 program. I can tell you it is very high fidelity. And those crews practice those missions for hundreds of hours in those simulators, perfecting every aspect of that operation so that they get executed flawlessly. That's what we need to get to for the whole combat air force.
Exactly. So where are we on deploying SCARS and JSE in a box to individual units?
Well, SCARS is moving along very well. We're deployed now to multiple weapon systems, F-16, KC-135, JTAC trainers for the Air Force.
And F-22s.
F-22s, right?
Everywhere? At all the bases?
Ultimately, that is the goal of the SCARS program. Every mission training system in the Air Force, over 2,400 of them at 350 locations, will be virtualized, migrated to the SCARS architecture. That's how they will get their ATOs in the future. So we're about halfway through that process of building out that infrastructure.
Okay.
For the JSE in a box deployment, we're closer to the beginning of that, right? Because of these challenges of multi-level security, of getting access to that data. JSE was really designed to be uniquely deployed to Nellis and Pax River on these unique hardware sets. So they have to be sort of re-architected for the SCARS common architecture. And so that we're still kind of at the beginning of that. But over the next year, and particularly in PACOM, we do have plans to start to take JSE in a box out into the wild at places like Anderson Air Force Base to start to introduce it into the operational environment.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that. So you mentioned Paycom. Gentlemen, talk to me about Valiant Shield, because I think, we mentioned earlier at the very beginning that LVC is real, but I think most operators be like, yeah, I haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah. So
great idea, but let's show me the proof.
So the U.S. Indo-PACOM, specifically J7, has a program called the Pacific Multi-Domain Experimentation or Training Experimentation Capability, PEMTEC, led by Dr. Andre Stridiron, a very ambitious program to start to bring this high-fidelity 5th-gen LVC capability to the PACOM AOR west of the date line so that those deployed forces can train while they're deployed and continue to demonstrate combat credibility and achieve the deterrent effects that's desired, as well as prepare for any possible conflict, right? Valiant Shield 24 last year was really the first opportunity to demonstrate some of this new capability. And so we set up a LVC network there in Guam, added F-16, F-18, Intel trainer, a JTAC trainer, as well as connected to these slate pods, the LVC pods that were carried by F-18s, the data infrastructure to connect those pods, all based on the SCARS architecture, so that we can now integrate all this stuff in that environment. And it was a very successful demonstration. We were able to push constructive data to live F-18s. We were able to fly, true live virtual 4 ships of F-18s where, if you're in the sim, you can't tell who's live and who's virtual. And if you're in the airplane, unless you actually looked out the window when you were in a close formation, you couldn't tell who the virtual players were. They're talking to each other on the radio. They're doing coordinated engagements, et cetera, right? So that was really the first demonstration. Based on that success, we are expanding the capability in Indo-PACOM, and there's been a number of exercises that we've participated since then, where we have continued to demonstrate. Every time we go to a new exercise, we bring a new capability, a new sim, a new model integration into a new network. What we're really looking forward now to is Valiant Shield 26, where it's going to be, to quote one of the planners, the greatest LVC event ever, where we will have lots of live players, F-35s, E-7 from our coalition partners, ships, ground players, potentially integrating live submarines as a long-range joint fires capability, and then all the C2 components for Guam defense, for the multi-domain operations targeting that they're going to be doing out of the Philippines, and the intel exploitation and dissemination of intelligence data based on constructive ISR sensor data that's coming in. It's going to be a big event. Valiant Shield 26 is kind of being planned around this LVC as one of its major objectives.
Wow, that's going to be a huge test regarding the maturity of the technology, but the value potential, the benefits is enormous. So I can see why they're calling it the greatest LVC event ever. Also because there haven't been a whole lot of them. So every time you're doing it, you're growing. What are you learning through these iterations?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of blocking and tackling. Things like Link 16 across the Indo-PACOM AOR is already kind of a kludged together collection of systems, right? And so how do you get the data distribution, the interconnectivity that you need to get everybody the right data at the right time? A lot of cyber approvals that have to be coordinated between different agencies, a lot of connecting of things, like simulators to radios that haven't been connected before. So there's a lot of that programmatic lessons that we're learning and kind of forging a path ahead on. The opportunity for these different joint players to train together is bringing up all kinds of things that we didn't anticipate. For example, Army air defense operators, not used to an Air Force weapons school style debrief. There's a little bit of a cultural change there, but once they kind of realize that, hey, this is non-attributional, this is purely to improve your effectiveness as an air defense operator, they're taken to it very quickly. So things like that, we're learning as well. And then, of course, as we've been talking about CCAs, we're going to open up a whole new realm for CCA testing and development with this capability.
Yeah, I think also a big priority for Indo-PACOM is they have to train in place, because it is a live engagement in that theater today. And so they cannot drop everything and come back to CONUS to go to Nellis for 2 weeks. We've got to be able to bring them the training so they can train in place. And that's what Matt and his team has proven out through Valiant Shield and a couple other exercises, Slingstone, things like that are missile defense specific.
Resolute Forces Pacific, and Cope North, and a few others.
All those things, we're providing training in place.
That's a really important point, because I don't think that enough of us appreciate that they're out there doing the job, the JOB, every single day, and they can't take a vacation to come come back to Nellis, come back to PAX, and sort of get that re-blue there, they've got to get that,
That's right.
sharpen their teeth while they're out.
That's right. That's right. And so we're bringing it to them.
You know, another piece that you mentioned up, Matt, that I actually hadn't anticipated was if, as we begin to integrate across other services, the joint component is that there's a culture shift.
Yeah.
Because we as airmen are brought up in that debrief culture, but that's not necessarily the same for everyone across the DoD.
Yeah, for something like air and missile defense, it's been really, really enlightening. Like I've stood behind some of those operators as they're, those Army operators as they're going through these events, right, where the lieutenant who is supervising the Army team that's controlling the ground-based Aegis, Patriot, and THAAD batteries is sitting there with the phone glued to his ear, talking to his Air Force ABM counterpart. Going through their process, like, okay, I see a track. Is that one of yours? Okay, I'm not going to shoot it. Okay, you got that missile coming in. I won't shoot it, right? I'm going to go after this one so that you don't accidentally shoot down your own airplanes, right? Or you don't shoot 17 missiles at the same target and quickly run out of your capacity to engage the next wave, right? All of that stuff is, it's going to be crucial for things like Golden Dome to work out between the services.
Yeah, and so it's not just a culture shift, but it's also through these exercises we can see the seams and the gaps of whether or not it's doctrine, coordination, C2, or even technology that we need to be able to solve to be able to be better glued together, integrated, so we can synchronize and prioritize our operations.
That's right.
Okay, so 5 to 10 years, how do we measure winning or losing? What should we be seeing in 5 and 10 years out? Master, let's start with you.
That's a tough one. What we should be seeing is going to be a integrated training solution that is being heavily input by industry to allow the government to maintain their ownership of their programs, but industry and the horsepower behind industry apply all the capabilities there and provide it to the government. So we've talked about LVC. We've talked about JSE, Joint Simulation Environment. There is a place for all of these different capabilities. There's a place for the simulator you grew up in, flying the F-16.
Unit training device, you're a procedurals trainer.
And the full mission training system, the full dome, where you have to be able to do emergency procedures and you have to be able to shoot an ILS in the weather at night, those sort of things. So there is a place for all of these. So what
different levels of training, different
Correct.
Fidelity, and using it the appropriate need,
That's
point
it.
of need.
So you had mentioned earlier the ecosystem, the training ecosystem. So we're not looking anymore at a single trainer. It's the ecosystem. So the legacy simulator has a place. It's a part test trainer, but it's really important. You don't fly into the ground, right?
Yeah.
JSE has its place. Fence in to fence out, high fidelity fight, missile defense. And then any constructive is what's going to allow us to then provide that depth and that quantity that we're going to see live. And so in 5 years, we should have that completely hammered out and should be presenting that to the warfighter to train. And at the end of the day, it's our kids that are going to be fighting this fight. And so it's important to us that we get this right so that bad things don't happen. And then just like Red Flag was after Vietnam and ended up in dominance in Desert Storm, what we're doing today should end up at dominance in the next fight. And that's what we're looking to get. And it's all these things combined as part test trainers under that ecosystem that is what we should see in 5 years.
That's almost a mic drop moment. But Matt, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, for me, I have this kind of nirvana vision of a future where, let's say you are deployed or you are stationed in PACOM or wherever the location is, Misawa. Maybe you're out on an Aegis cruiser on a cruise. Maybe you're in a forward deployed Air Force TOCL or an Air Force Combat Intel Cell as an analyst, right? Or you're flying airplanes, right? Whatever the case is, you get up in the morning, you go brief a training event. You either step to your live aircraft or you step to your sim or you step to your station in the TOCL or the KOC, right? And you fight the war. And it's completely seamless to you, right? You're using your combat systems, you're getting all the data, you're coordinating with all the joint players you would, and you're able to actually rehearse those major combat operations in a way that if it actually were to happen, you'd be completely unsurprised by it. In fact, it might be even a little bit easier than you were expecting.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time today. Really appreciate you being here. Your insights are incredibly useful and interesting, especially the direction that we're going. So I look forward to seeing SCARS and JSC in the box deployed across all of the units so we can begin to move towards this future.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time, Lucky. This is a great opportunity to get in here and talk about stuff that's really near and dear to us. I think you can tell we're pretty fired up about these things. Helping out the warfighter, and any chance to talk about it is much appreciated.
Yeah, same. Appreciate the time and appreciate the platform that Mitchell's providing, that you guys are doing to be able to get the word out. We're swimming in the same direction. We're all rowed in the same direction, if you will. And the end goal is to provide that warfighter the training capability to dominate the next. And that's where we're trying to go. And I appreciate your help with that.
And with that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's conversation. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to you, our listeners, for your continued support and for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that like button or follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas that you would like us to explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on X, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great Aerospace Power kind of day. See you next time. So this week, for our inaugural Ask Us Anything, Stephen Dunkel reached out and asked our space team, when do you estimate will the Space Force become its own department, and when will it be the largest department by funding? All right, what do you guys think?
So we were having a debate about what does the largest mean? Does it mean by people or by budget?
Well, he said by budget, right?
By budget.
By funding, so by budget. And right now, the Space Force is the smallest. It's even smaller than the Marine Corps in terms of resources.
Yeah.
So Jen, you did some quick math, and what fraction of the Space Force, what fraction of the Air Force budget is the Space Force?
So originally, back in for 2020, what happened was we shaved off 10% of the Air Force budget and gave it to the Space Force. Now, what's happening now, rough numbers, 30 billion versus 190 billion. So we're looking at about 16%. I mean, if we want to compare money.
Now, are you taking the pass-through out of that before you do that comparison, or does that pass-through?
Yes.
Okay, super.
So pass-through's gone. That's pure Air Force.
Got it.
Yeah, because pass-through, man, that throw another 30 billion on top of that to the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force. So, yeah.
Does that include reconciliation?
Oh, so reconciliation. I remember
I think reconciliation is kind of funny money.
It is funny money, but it's a complicated question, right? What budgets are we talking about? When? What time frame?
Yeah, let's just take reconciliation because that's a one-time. That's a one-time deal. Right?
Yeah, and that's 4-year money too. So I'm not exactly sure how they're. From what I understand, the services are submitting it all on a spreadsheet up to the the administration.
The lowly Excel sheet. Who knew that was what was going to divine the future for the department.
Right.
All right, so
that's a lot of growth that needs to occur to be on par with the Air Force.
Not to mention the Army or the Navy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the question is do they want it at this point in time either? When are they even going to want to have that level of not control per se, but much larger responsibilities as well that are not pure space?
Yeah, I think war is just a human endeavor, and there's always going to be humans in the mix. And until there's more humans in space than there are on Earth, I don't see a department of the Space Force that's bigger than the Army or the Navy, because we still, in the end, are going to want to control and occupy territory terrestrially. So even though things are more expensive in space, I think in the end, the budget's not going to surpass the services we need to control and maintain presence here on Earth.
Yeah,
it won't be in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think if we look at it as an event-based decision as opposed to a calendar-based decision, it's when are the interests of the United States in space equal to or greater than the interests terrestrially? And when you phrase it like that, it's almost well, never, right?
Yeah. Okay, so how about this? Does the Space Force ever become its own department?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an events-based decision. I think the question was when. I don't know that we can say a when, but there's certainly at some event in time we'll identify we need to have our own department because the relationship with the Air Force is just not working to provide us the foundation we need for the Space Force to operate. But pessimistically, I worry that it'll be some sort of catastrophic event where we go, why did this happen? It's like, well, the Space Force doesn't have control over the budget for all the things they need to support what they're doing. And then the remedy would be then to, okay, well, they need to have their own department. Ideally, we solve that issue before that kind of strategic failure of the future. But without some kind of forcing function, I don't know that there's the oomph there to drive its own service. And I don't know that the Space Force would want that today, but it's a matter of at some point in time it may be to
growing and maturing and developing to the point where
as our interest in space grow, the need to defend and protect and secure those interests will also grow, and at some point there will reach a tipping lever where we go, well, boy, we need to have a dedicated department because there are enough interests there. And hopefully, as Puma was saying, we make that decision preemptively like we did when we established the Space Force so that we prevent or deter such a catastrophe from occurring, because that's really what it's all about.
So is this generational? I mean, so we saw, for example, in the Air Force's history that it was essentially about a generation before the Air Force broke off from the Army. And it was also post-World War II. So we had tremendous personnel, tremendous equipment. And those are things that right now the Space Force doesn't fully have. I mean, you would need to grow your manpower so much.
Yeah.
So is that something that occurs in a generation per se?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. And another way to look at it is if right now we have a clear distinction between military space and civil space, if we decided because of priorities or whatever that we needed to merge those activities together, I could see a separate department of space that would incorporate all of those sorts of functions into one, and then you would be a separate department.
Yeah, I don't know that you'd want to merge civil and military
There's a lot
space.
of good reasons not
messy.
to. There's a lot of good reasons not to do that for sure, but
maybe
decisions.
Maybe on the generational pieces, this is the challenge: as the Space Force grows in numbers and capability and people, if there's not a coinciding growth in the infrastructure from the Air Force, right, we start crushing our infrastructure through our own weight of the Air Force. And so I think over generation, leadership and the Guardians will say, I'm not getting what I need from the Air Force, and something's got to give before we get there. So I would imagine, yes, generationally there'll be this demand signal that we want to be able to control and make trade space and say we need to invest into our infrastructure, and we're willing to trade off RDT&E or some other funds in the future to offset it and control that ourselves rather than rely on another service to provide that through the department. So I can see the generational standpoint, but it'll really be a demand signal from the leaders.
But also we do have an example where that has never happened, and that's with the Marine Corps and the Department of the Navy. Right. And the Marine Corps has been around for a couple of hundred years, several hundred years. Right. And they have never had that demand signal. And they are objectively a much larger force than the Space Force is. So I don't know. I feel like, I mean, they're 10 times, bigger than 10 times more. So I do think we have examples of how it did happen, where the Air Force broke off with a new department. And we have examples of how it hasn't happened, where the Marine Corps hasn't broken off with a new department.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, Boots. At the same time, the Marine Corps doesn't own an entire domain in and of itself, and it's not such a specialized service as the Guardians are with the Space Force. I mean, if you take a look at what the Marine Corps does, it is kind of a niche capability, but we still have an Army, we still have a Navy, and we still have an Air Force.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that allows the Marine Corps to be small and nimble and flexible and to be able to pivot the way that it does, because if something happens, you still have the other services to fall back on. So I think there's something unique about the Guardians and the Space Force that I see their path more similar to the Army Air Corps and the Army Air Forces, and then how we became our own service than the Marine Corps.
Because it's a
or
distinct
ironically
domain.
not unique, right? That they're the same as previous forces as opposed to just the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it comes down to what is going to be the tipping point, right? As Puma was talking about, it was about, not resources, but it was about the support that they would need from the other service Air Force that they might not be getting, right? So that's the whole Marine Corps parallel. But then is it going to be about personnel? Is it going to be about how mission gets bigger? Is it going to be about actual money? I think we don't know what that tipping point is going to be, or giant event of some kind.
Yeah.
So what should it be?
Well, just real quick along those lines. I mean, the Marine Corps has more functions than just riflemen. Every Marine's a rifleman, but they have more functions. When the Space Force stood up, it was intentionally they brought in specific and limited career fields. And there may be a natural growth of additional career fields need to come into the Space Force and grow and cultivate, because there are functions that need to be done and focused for the Space Force.
All right. Well, folks, thanks so much. And I hope you all enjoyed listening to this little banter for Ask Us Anything. Please go ahead and send us your questions at mitchell@afa.org.
Heather Penney, advocate for a separate Space Force department.
Who knew?
Someday.
Who knew?